Good evening. I'm Tom Von Hoff, and this is a Lakeville community forum called Combating Opioid Abuse in Lakeville. Just 18 months ago, we had a community forum on opioid abuse in Lakeville, and at that time, I talked about the most current figures that we had on opioid overdoses in the United States. And I said 78 Americans died each day. In 18 months, that figure has gone from 78 to 115 Americans die each day. Statistically, in the 2 hours that we'll spend here tonight, 9 Americans will die from opioid overdose. To understand this epidemic and the scope of it and how it has risen from nothing, you have to look back a little ways. In the mid-90s, I was a narcotics officer. I worked on a drug task force. 10% of our cases were heroin or prescription opiate cases. 10%. Most of the cases were cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana cases. If you would have told me at that time that by 2018, we would have 42,000 people or 44,000 people a year dying in this country from opioid overdoses, I would say you're crazy. I would say that can't happen. That couldn't possibly happen. That has happened. It's happening in our country. It's happening in Lakeville. In the state of Minnesota between 2015 and 2016, opioid overdoses, fatal overdoses, increased 17.9% alone. That's in Minnesota. This is not a problem that's happening somewhere else. This is not a problem that doesn't touch every community. It touches Lakeville, it touches large communities, it touches small communities, rural, urban. It does not discriminate. And this is an epidemic that kills. In 2015, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, started calling it an epidemic. And the reason they did that is because the CDC determined that drug overdoses were killing over 50,000 people a year in the United States. To understand that from a public safety point of view or a health point of view, that's more people being killed than are killed in motor vehicle crashes every year. That's more people that are being killed by gun violence in our country every year. And this touches every family. This evening, we're going to hear from 3 speakers with very moving stories that talk about how this touches every family. And they're going to share that with us. If we do nothing, in the next 10 years, 500,000 people in our country will die of opiate overdoses. And whether it's prescription, synthetic, or illicit, heroin or fentanyl, it makes no difference. This is an epidemic that's killing people. And we're fortunate here in Lakeville that we're talking about this. This is one of the primary steps of getting the information out. Because you will also hear that lack of information can be fatal in this epidemic. So one of the first steps is getting information out. And that's why it's so critical, and that's why we're so fortunate in this community to have a forum like this. This forum tonight, sponsored by the Lakeville Rotary, the Lakeville Area Chamber of Commerce, the Lakeville Area Path Coalition, the Lakeville Public Safety Foundation, the Lakeville Area Schools, District 194, and the Lakeville Police Department. All of these groups coming together to sponsor this, to make this happen this evening. And we're very fortunate with our speakers this evening. I think you will find their stories impactful. And we'll start this evening with Becky Savage from 525 Foundation. And I'm going to turn it over to her and have her start with her story.
I was brought in to tell you guys a little bit about our story and how our family has been affected by the opioid epidemic. And first, I'd like to introduce you to my two older sons. I'm the mother of 4 boys, and my 2 older sons were Nick and Jack. I'm also a nurse. I have my registered nursing degree, and I went back to school and I got my master's degree in nursing, and I was teaching in a nursing program and was working on my PhD. And life events happen, and your whole course of the direction that you think you're taking your life totally changes. And now I'm going around the country, talking to different schools, different communities, just to help increase awareness on opioids and the dangers of prescription medications if they're not taken the right way, or if they're not stored in a safe place, and then if they're not disposed of properly. So anyway, I just had a few pictures that I like to show. Like I said, I go around the country, and I've been talking to usually high school kids, although I have had the opportunity to talk to some kids that are in middle school. And I've found that kids like to connect with a story. If they see pictures of who I'm talking about, it seems like it makes a little bit different than when they're hearing the story. So when I read a book or I'm talking about something, I like to see who I'm talking about. And so these are some of the pictures that I show students. These are me and Nick and Jack. This picture was taken 3 weeks before they passed away. Nick had just finished his freshman year at Indiana University, and we were at a Kenny Chesney concert celebrating his first year. It's a senior picture of Jack. And one of Nick's senior pictures. It's a picture of myself and Nick. Like I said, he had just finished his freshman year from Indiana University in Bloomington. Jack had just graduated 2 weeks before. Here's a picture of Nick and Jack, and believe it or not, in Indiana we do have hockey, and they were avid hockey players. They learned to skate when they were about 3 years old, and were playing hockey when they were about 5 years old. And this is a picture. They played for their high school hockey teams, and this is like a travel team. Like, they take kids from different high school hockey teams, and they were actually fortunate enough they both made the team and were able to play together, so that was kind of fun. And this is one of the pictures that I like to show the students, because I think, like I said, a lot of students are visual. And this picture is a special picture to me because it's the last picture that we had taken of a family of 6. And every year, our kids were kind of a creature of habit. They would like to go to the same location for spring break. And so I thought I would take that opportunity. So every year we had a family picture taken on the beach at the same location. So this was our family picture taken. And after poor choices were made, the following year, this was our family picture. So it just goes to show kids, communities, the impact that one bad choice can have on your families. So June 14th, 2015, our lives changed forever. We live in a community where we have a big high school, and there were probably about between 650 and 700 kids that graduated from high school that year. And in our community, everybody throws big graduation parties. My husband had taken our younger 2 kids to go fishing that night, and I decided to stay home with the older 2 boys and had attended some graduation parties with them and then went home. Our boys were at a graduation party where another group of teenagers came, and one of the teenagers had a prescription pill bottle, and he decided to start passing out some pills, and it was an opioid painkiller that he had stole from somebody's medicine cabinet. That next morning, my boys came home at midnight. They came home at curfew, checked in with me, and then headed to the kitchen to make a snack. And I turned my light out and went to bed. The next morning, it started out like in many other weekend days for me. I was doing laundry, And I remember walking in Jack's room, picking up laundry and talking to him about getting up, not sleeping in too late. His dad has things that he wants help with today. And I remember looking at him, thinking he looked like an angel sleeping there. And little did I know the prophecy that that thought would hold for me that day. I walked over to awaken him, and he was unresponsive. I immediately called for 911 as I was calling for my older son, who I knew was at home with friends, and he never came. And what I now know is that while I was hollering for help, Nick's friends were trying to awaken him, and he was unresponsive as well. So that day, we lost our two older sons as a result of poor decision making. They were participating in underage drinking, and we all know that you can't make good decisions while drinking, and underage drinking is no different. And so when they were offered a pill, they made a poor choice to take it, not knowing the effects that that could have on them, and they lost their lives. We didn't talk to really anybody publicly about what happened to our family for the first year. As you guys can all imagine, losing one child is horrific. Losing two children is just unimaginable. But we decided to focus on our other two kids and make sure that we healed as a family, a strong family unit. We were approached about a year after our boys passed away from a local coalition that was holding a town hall similar to this and asked if we would be interested in talking about our family story. It was about underage drinking. And I talked to my husband about it, and we decided that we would because our kids were participating in underage drinking, and we felt like that had some clout into the decisions they made that night. But we were also promised that there'd be maybe 12 to 15 people there. So we said, okay, we'll come do it. And over 200 people showed up. And never mind that I was terrified because I had not done public speaking except for my 30 or 40 students in my class at that point. But we somehow got through it, and what we realized is that we had a room of 200 plus community members who were terrified that something like this could happen to them. We started getting phone calls from local high schools to come and speak to their students, so we started doing that. Next thing you know, we got a call from the Megyn Kelly show. Megyn Kelly on Today. And we went out there and told our story. And just from there, it just started snowballing into kind of what it is today. We decided to create a foundation, which is called the 525 Foundation. And a lot of people ask me, where did you come up with that name? But Nick and Jack, like I said, were avid hockey players. And I have a picture at home with all four of my boys standing there with their hockey jerseys on. And Nick and Jack were just happened to be standing right next to each other. So we came up with the 525 Foundation. So we realized the impact that our story had on families and that people were going home and starting conversations with their parents, with their kids, and they started cleaning out their medicine cabinets. Our message that we talk about is very simple. It's about having those conversations, which we did as the parents. We had conversations with our kids, but never did we talk about prescription drug misuse and abuse. That wasn't even on our radar 3.5 years ago. So we decided to do that. We also decided to help our community in the cleanup efforts with prescription pills. So the DEA hosts twice a year National Pill Pickup Day. So we got in on the first one. And we really spread the news by word of mouth and by social media. And we had one location, and for 4 hours, we picked up prescription pills that were unused or expired medications. And in a 4-hour period, we picked up, just a little bit over 300 pounds of pills. So if you think about how much one pill weighs, that's a lot of pills collected. So we decided that was such a success, let's do it again. So we did it 3 months later in collaboration with our local drug task force, and we also had a couple other corners that we had for pickup. Again, 4-hour period. We collected just over 750 pounds of pills. Well, let's do it again. 3 months later, we did it again. Same scenario, although we collected 1,200 pounds of pills. The last pill pickup that we just had, we collected over 2,568 pounds of pills. If you think about how much one pill weighs, and that one pill could potentially take somebody's life, that could be potentially a lot of lives saved. So we have now spoken to over 80,000 students, parents, educators, including the U.S. Senate. I was asked to speak and testify in front of their Health, Education, Labor, and Pension, their HELP committee. This fall, our 525 Foundation has announced a new program. It's called the Drop to Stop program. We have a couple permanent pill drop boxes in our community. We had one at the local police department, which was way on the other side of town. And we had one in our hospital, but you had to park your car and you had to walk into the hospital and go into the basement outside the pharmacy and drop off your pills. So we decided that we wanted to put permanent pill drop boxes where most people could see them, where it was pretty visible and people could participate in it. So we collaborated with a local grocery store that had a pharmacy in it, and we put 3 of them in their stores, front and center, right up by the exit door. That has been in place for about 6 weeks, and to date, we've collected between 300 and 400 pounds at each location, and we just signed a contract to put in 3 more permanent pillbox locations in our community. What can we do as parents and as community members? I get asked a lot when I talk to kids, when they finally, a lot of times after I talk and I show a video to them, a lot of them are still processing what we've just talked about, so a lot of questions aren't asked. But when I do get questions asked, it's always the same question. How do we get out of a situation if we're at a party or somewhere and we don't want to be in the situation? How do we get out of it but still look cool? That's the most frequent question I get from kids. So, believe it or not, peer pressure is there. It's here. It hasn't gone away. And I think sometimes that we as parents forget how hard it is to go against that grain of peer pressure. So we talk to the kids a lot about having an exit strategy, an exit plan. A plan that they've discussed ahead of time, they've rehearsed, because we all know that plans, when it's rehearsed, it's a lot easier to execute. And whether it's texting your parents a certain code and they call you, there's a fake emergency at home, or you have a friend, you have a code with a friend that you guys know when this is said or happens, that it's an exit strategy for you guys to get out of a situation. I also talk a lot about the kids. They also want to know, what can we do to help? We're just kids. I was an ambassador for Walgreens last year, and they invited me back this year. I just was there last week in New York, and it's called We Day. And what it is, it's an event that kids can't buy tickets for. It's an event that they can only get tickets for by doing community service. And they had over 19,000 kids last week that were at this event that heard our message. And the message was very clear. Walgreens, I believe Walgreens in this community actually has drop boxes in there. Go home and talk to your parents. They're all like, what can we do afterwards? What can we do? We're just kids. Those kids, let me tell you, if I could bottle that energy in that room that day, we'd have something really powerful. But that's where we need to reach. Those kids, go home, talk to your parents, clean out your medicine cabinets. You can make a difference by doing that. So that is just a little bit about our story, what we've done, and how we have tried to turn our grief into a legacy of love, so to speak, that can ultimately help change other people's lives and hopefully change the direction of this opioid epidemic in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. The format this evening is we're going to hear from our three speakers, and then we're going to open up the panel to questions for the audience. So they'll have an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to have a question and answer afterwards. Now I'm going to have Sherry Schumas come up from For Jake's Sake Foundation and tell us her story as well.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sherry Schmaus, and this is Carla Peterson. We work for the Jake's Sake Foundation. Actually, my son Jake had passed away in 2013 from a heroin overdose. It shattered our lives. They'll never be the same. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Jake. From an early age, it was obvious that everything came easy for Jake. He excelled in sports and in school and had so many friends, and everyone loved being around Jake. Jake made that easy too. Jake was compassionate, loyal, and a true friend. He had a great sense of humor and always turned away to make things fun, whatever he was doing. And he also had style. Yeah. He loved to look good. He had to have his hair just so, loved having new clothes, especially shoes. He even loved to knit hats. Jake was also a ladies' man, and all the girls loved Jake and the famous hugs that Jake gave. The ones that he gave me were a little different than the ones he gave the girls. But Jake, I was told by a friend that Jake gave those hugs to people that also were sad and feeling alone, just to show them that they were loved. Jake was an amazing young man. And Jake had the smile that would light up the room when he walked in and sparkly, beautiful blue eyes. Jake had a direction and a vision for his future. He was in college and he was studying computer science and graphic design. Most importantly to me, he was my son and I loved him with all my heart. Jake was 21 years old and the world was at his feet right up until May 22nd, 2013. Where he had died from a heroin overdose. Jake didn't seek out the drug that killed him. He had finally given in to peer pressure. After being asked several times, he had no idea how addictive opiates were, and matched the stories of very many young people that I've talked to since. They had no idea how opiates affected, how addicted they were. Jake actually said to me, "Mom, I can't believe this is my life now. Who would ever thought Jake Schmaus, heroin addict?" And I said, "Jake, I never would have thought in a million years." He said, "Me either." He told me he was a prisoner in his own body. It just controlled everything. Looking back, there were signs, nothing obvious because I had no idea that heroin was out there. But we noticed that Q-tips were missing a lot. And I guess that is something they use for heroin.
So, when you want to move forward, just hit that little arrow.
Okay. So as a family, we were struggling how to get through this. And so we decided that we were going to start a foundation and to help other kids. And so we started the Jake Foundation to help us get through the pain also and help people with it too. For Jake's Sake is dedicated to changing the trend. Statistics show heroin has increased. What even scarier is that 80% of addiction start in the teen years. That is why I do what I do and is what we all need to do. For Jake's Sake Foundation knows that addiction is a disease. This is why we need to make sure to have education, curriculum in schools now, so we can do better educating our youth at a younger age about drug addiction and drug abuse before the addiction has a chance to steal them away from their families, like I lost Jake. Jake was beautiful. He was what every parent would want in a child. And I think about what he could be doing right now if he wasn't stolen from us. I want to make sure no parents ever have to learn to live with the pain by preventing the demand of these drugs, by education and awareness, and let the kids know that one bad choice can take their life. I know Jake would want this. He'd want to help people. And one of his sayings was, he wanted to be a teacher and a coach. So we say, one of our sayings is, maybe this is Jake teaching us all a very valuable lesson. Thank you.
Good evening. Yes, I'm Carla Peterson, and I've been employed by the For Jake's Sake Foundation, and the main charge for me has been to help them increase public awareness and having more of a community presence, along with helping to develop curriculum to go into the schools. We have had a number of conversations with young people, and they're like, we didn't know, and just like Jake said, I had no idea. They equate drugs as kind of like alcohol or marijuana, and opioids and heroin are totally different beasts than those types of drugs. And so we feel very passionate that we need to get the word out to the kids, and we need to do it earlier than what we have been doing. A lot of schools right now aren't really even introducing it. They're doing alcohol and tobacco in some of the school districts when we polled them. And so our main mission right now is to really develop some curriculum that is very impactful and effective and engaging to the youth. And so right now we currently have a pilot going on, and it's with 7 school districts. And let me talk to you about our mission. Our mission is to have heroin and opioid prevention and awareness as standardized education nationwide, provide scholarships to recovering young addicts looking to make a fresh start, provide education and awareness for families and communities. And we really want to focus on the positive and functional solutions that empower the individual and transform lives. So as you see, number 1 is about getting heroin and opioid prevention awareness as standardized education, actually nationwide. Right now we're just working with Minnesota, but our goal is to expand it beyond Minnesota. So these are the 7 school districts so far that are piloting with us. And the demographic that has the highest overdose death rate is actually 18 to 25-year-olds. And so that, again, clearly demonstrates to us that the younger kids, the teenagers, are not hearing maybe accurate information about opioids and heroin. They don't understand how potent it is. Painkillers are 2 to 10 times stronger than what your normal body creates for endorphins, and that turns into dopamine. And so it gives them an instant high that they have not experienced prior to that. And so it also, with dopamine in your brain, it really wants you to, they want that to repeat, that good feeling. Your brain says it craves it. It's like, I want more of that. And so that's why it gets so highly addicted, and heroin has the highest addiction rate of any of the other drugs. And so we need to hit our kids early on. And SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration Services, has stated that their premise from all the research that they have done, they're one of our gurus or one of our experts that we refer to, is that you need to start early, you need to have consistent messaging, and you need to have frequent conversations. And that's our goal, is to get curriculum into 5th, 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. Our pilot right now is on 6th and 7th grade, which is, we created that, and it was using a variety of evidence-based curriculum that's already been out on the market by NIDA and SAMHSA Discovery Education, as well as creating our own customized portion of that. And then for the 8th and 9th grade health education classes, we are actually partnering with the Robert Crown Center for Health Education. They're based out of Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, and they have been working with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. If you're familiar at all with them, they're a phenomenal research-based organization. And so it's an online interactive type of curriculum, and so that's what we wanted to kind of see, if more of the traditional PowerPoint, classroom activities, worksheets, can resonate with the younger kids, but then when we get to the high school, middle school, high schools, that we're going to have more of an updated online interactive type of curriculum. To the left here, you can see it's just one of the little slides, and they call it the graphic novel. And I guess the best way I can describe that is if it's like a comic book. And you got little bubbles with the little conversations. And so you actually go through the life of a boy, and he's got a girlfriend, he's got a job, he's, good grades and very involved in school, and he starts to dabble with some pain medications. And slowly his grades start to decline. He's starting having problems on his job. Family relationships become strained. Girlfriend becomes strained. She, defends him when her friends are calling him out on some of his behaviors. And slowly he declines to getting into heroin and having an overdose. So they walk through this story, and then there's questions at the end and stuff. So that's what we've really been working with right now, and we're getting ready for our pilot to begin. Last legislative session, we actually had a bill go through. It did pass the House, it passed the Senate, but unfortunately it was vetoed by Governor Dayton because it was part of the omnibus bill. And so obviously many of us were very discouraged by that, but we are eager to reintroduce it this legislative session. And the 5 key elements of the bill consisted of identification of effective substance misuse prevention tools and strategies, including innovative uses of technology and media, develop and promote a comprehensive substance misuse prevention curriculum for students in grades 5th through 12th that educates students and families about the dangers of substance misuse, and in particular the opioid abuse prevention, integrate substance misuse prevention into curricula across subject areas. And that to us is really a key, because health education classes are required in some grades but not in all grades, and it puts a lot of kind of burden on your health education teachers. They already are, their curriculum is jam-packed. They got all these goals and already there are limitations to what they can do. So by us piloting and infusing this curriculum for 2 to 3 days out of their class semester has already been a little bit of a challenge for them, but they're willing to come to cooperate with us and partner with us. So we see that sciences, though, and social studies, psychology, there's a lot of ways that you can still bring in the different elements about what heroin does and pain medication does to the brain and to your body and to your decision making and refusal skills. That's a big key. And then also we have to bring in the parents, too. We have to give them a toolkit so that they know how to have those conversations. And who do they go to? Who do they call? And if they're having questions about whether their child might be dabbling in it. The fourth one was to train school districts, teachers, athletic coaches, and other school staff in effective substance misuse prevention strategies. And we currently are teaming with Anoka County Community Health Environmental Services and the Minnesota Youth Athletic Services, which is a statewide association, and they train Trusted Coaches program. So it is a certificate program that volunteer coaches who are coaching 10-year-olds up to 17-year-olds take. And so it just helps validate that if you're a parent who has their child participating in like a traveling sport, you can feel that there's some standardization, there's been some background checks, there's been a little bit more involvement in education with that coach. And so we are in the process of actually developing that curriculum for the coaches to take and be certified in. So that's from now until May of 2019 that we'll be working with them. And then just the last one is to collaborate with school districts to evaluate the effectiveness of district substance misuse prevention efforts. So it's really just getting everybody around the table and finding out what works, and then creating a package deal that we can go not only statewide, but even nationally. Senator Klobuchar just contacted our office in August and said, I heard about your bill. Tell me about it, I want to help you. And so we've got her working at the federal level right now, trying to author a bill for us as well. So is there anything else, Sherry, that you would like to add? Okay, well, that's kind of what we're doing. And so you can always go to our website, the www.forjakesake.org, and it will give you updates as far as our bill, as far as what we're doing with curriculum, and how you can get involved and help support us in our efforts.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to have the Chief of Police come up here, Jeff Long, who worked with Judy Kelleher in putting this form together. So let's give them a round of applause right now, getting this valuable information out. And I'll turn it over to the chief.
Good, thank you. I get to introduce our next speaker, which is Sandy Taney. She's one of our officers. We're lucky in Lakeville that we have several different strategies to approach this epidemic, and you'll find that Lakeville and Dakota County are no different than any other city or county in the rest of the country. We continue to see an increase in the abuse. So Sandy was assigned to our drug task force, similar to former Chief Vonhoff. She was elected as the statewide Narcotics Officer of the Year for 2018. And she was also responsible for taking the most guns away from drug dealers in the entire Dakota County. So she has quite a background. She's going to talk. She was recently promoted to sergeant. Obviously, with that good work, she has some leadership skills, and recently promoted to sergeant. But she's going to talk a little bit today about Lakeville and then Dakota County as a whole, and maybe some of her other experiences.
As Chief Long said, my name's Sandy Taney. I've been with the Lakeville Police Department since 1999. I was a CSO for a couple years and was promoted to police officer in 2001. During that time, I've held many different supplemental assignments, but the most recent was the drug task force, where I was there for 2 years. The chief stated that I was Minnesota Narcotics Officer of the Year, which is true. I just want to talk a little bit about how I kind of got there in my experience. One case that I worked when I was with the task force is the suspect by the name of John Biernat. Started out as a typical narcotics case. He was moving quite a bit of meth and cocaine. He was a career criminal. He was probably 54 years old and had a criminal history dating back to the 80s. So I had an informant that could purchase from him. When the informant did that, during that time he had 2 guns strapped to his sides. He was a violent fella. We also were able to introduce an undercover officer that was able to buy from him. Ultimately, a search warrant was drafted and executed. And he was a violent felon who shouldn't have had any guns, but he had 12 guns in his possession, one being an AK-47. He had an ounce of meth, an ounce of coke, 5 pounds of mushrooms, and 25 pounds of marijuana. Ultimately, I seized his phone and did a search warrant, and I found some pretty disturbing texts on his phone. It appeared that he was talking sexually with 2 young girls. Throughout my investigation, I found out that he actually had been victimizing his 2 stepdaughters since they were 8 and 10 years old. Mr. Biernat is currently serving federal prison time for 23 years on 1 count of child production, pornography, and 1 count of felon in possession. So that is a case that definitely was the most rewarding that I've ever done, but also very challenging, both emotionally and on a professional level. The task force is normally 3-year assignment. However, as the chief stated, I was promoted, been a sergeant for a whole 8 days. As a narcotics officer, I primarily was in plain clothes and used unmarked cars. Our goal is to blend into the community. The drug task force is made up of several agencies throughout Dakota County, and we work under a joint powers agreement. Some of the highlights for the drug task force last year was we seized 86 weapons. We conducted and executed 184 search warrants. We seized $300,000 in cash that we believed was drug proceeds, and $70,000 of that money was from Lakeville criminals. Throughout the year, we seized 2 pounds of cocaine, 12 pounds of meth, 304 pounds of marijuana, and 1 pound of heroin. But also, with the heroin, other opioids came into play. We had heroin that tested with fentanyl in it. Fentanyl is very potent. It's 100 times more potent than morphine, and it can also present a danger to not only the user, the suspect, but it can also present a danger to police officers coming in contact with it, and also our K-9 partners. Some other opioids that we seen in Dakota County, and specifically in Lakeville, hydrocodone. Last year, we seized 14 fluid ounces of liquid hydrocodone from a gentleman that was selling within our community. We also, some other regular opioids that we see or seize is hydromorphine, morphine, oxycodone, Percocet. Some of those are where they're actually getting legitimately, and then that person is selling them because they don't need them, but the doctor thinks that they're getting them legitimately. Sometimes grandparents or parents' medications being stolen and being sold. Even though I think we've done a decent job at seizing heroin and opioids throughout Dakota County, it certainly has not made a dent in some of the overdose-related deaths that we've seen. One in particular that I definitely will never forget is probably from 4 or 5 years ago. A young mom had chronic pain and was prescribed fentanyl patches. She ended up overdosing on fentanyl patches, but she lived alone with her 10-month-old baby. And because she lived alone, no one checked on her for days. When they finally did check on her, both she and her 10-month-old baby were deceased. And that's one that definitely I won't erase from my brain for sure. Another one that comes to mind is in our community. In 2016, Mr. Abel Mulat, who was 23 years old, he was found deceased on the side of the road at the liquor store, County Road 46 in Galaxy. Throughout the investigation, it was learned that Mr. Mulat had an addiction problem, and the autopsy showed that he died of drug toxicity with MDMA, fentanyl, and alprazolam in his system. Drugs seem to know no borders. It doesn't matter what economic status you have, what race you are, or whether you're male or female. They impermeate every community, including Lakeville. To move forward, I think we need to listen to families like these and the tragedies that they've had and keep the dialogue going with our kids, with teachers, law enforcement. As a law enforcement officer, we can only do so much, and we need the support of the community to keep our efforts going to tackle this problem.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad that the sergeant shared with us a little bit about narcotics, and we don't often think about this, but I would say the time I spent in narcotics, you see the very worst criminals, and these are criminals, and they steal people's lives. And if it's not literal, then it's figuratively, because we would say, when we would see heroin addicts, we'd say they were like ghost people, because their souls were stolen. And when you talk about the impact that this has on the community, we're seeing it. But it's good to hear, and I thank Sergeant Taney for sharing that perspective, because you don't often hear that and hear that aspect of it. But the very worst criminals. Right now we're going to go to our question and answer. Chief Long and Judy Keller will be walking around the audience. If you just raise your hand, they'll come to you with a microphone, and you can direct your questions to any of our panel members here. We've covered a lot of ground tonight, but any questions you might have, just raise your hand, and they'll come right up to you with a microphone. Any question that you want to ask about their foundations, what they're doing, what we should do.
Good evening. First of all, my condolences to you who have lost children. What do you do, maybe this is a question for the sergeant, what do you do with the money and the drugs that are confiscated?
Once the court process is over and it's determined that it is drug proceeds, it goes back into the drug task force as far as being able to purchase recording devices, make sure that we have enough officers on staff, and to fund our efforts to move forward and continue fighting. It just keeps going back into the system.
This is really directed to anyone who can answer it, but you talked about the increase in the use of opiates. Why is that? Why is the increase so drastic? What is the cause of that?
Well, I think it's availability. I think for so many years, prescriptions have been written because that's what they were educated on, pain control. And I know I'm from the healthcare field, and there used to be 5 vital signs, and then it went to the 6 vital signs, and the 6th one was pain. And your patient needed to have a 0 on that pain scale, and so physicians got graded on that. In the hospital setting, it was reimbursement issues with that. So I think maybe way back when, they thought, I think they thought they were doing best by the patient, but I think we just kind of we're seeing now the effects of that being out in our community. A lot of people that we talk to, they get a prescription and maybe they only use 3 of them, but way back then they were writing a prescription for 30 or for 60 of them. So they've just been sitting in their medicine cabinet, and now they're being taken. So I think the medical community is doing a lot better with really evaluating pain and finding out if there's different modalities that can help with that, whether it be physical therapy, different things like that, and then really monitoring that. And like, I know a lot of physicians in our area, wisdom teeth, used to get a prescription for 30. Now we've seen a drastic change. Now they don't even go home with anything but Tylenol or 3, a prescription for 3. Which has really cut down on some of the excess medications in the medicine cabinets. I don't know if you guys have seen.
I would agree that it's availability. Many years ago, you heard about meth labs being built, and with the restrictions that Sudafed ended up having, the database that was created, that kind of solved that problem, or at least limited it. And I think we're at a crossroads where we need more restrictions, and we need the medical, the doctors, the medical boards on board with this decision as well, that they need to temper what they're prescribing. And the communities, once you're done with the medication that you have used, if you have leftovers, you need to get rid of it. But I think it really boils down to availability as well.
A number of years ago, we used to have the DARE programs in the schools. Is it time that we bring those back? And all the way through into high school, we keep repeating this drug awareness stuff.
Can I just talk to that for a second? I was a full-time DARE officer, and I think one of the problems we were running into was funding and curriculum. There's so much that is mandated that gets into these classrooms that something has to get squeezed out. So I think what Jake's Sake Foundation is doing is kind of getting back to that.
Yeah.
But I would, obviously I think it's a multifaceted approach of how we're going to address this. So I don't know if DARE is the answer, but I think something like this is definitely getting back in the schools.
So I will finish up that one. As a member of Rotary, knowing what we're doing, but also as a Board of Education Director, Rotary has agreed to sponsor, we have a program called Youth Frontier that's in our I think it starts in 4th grade and up through 8th grade. And part of that is just educating the child on making healthy, smart decisions, mental health, bullying, the drug piece, making good decisions, all that's coming into play there. In our schools, we only had it funded for some of the grade levels, for some of the programs. And what's going to our board, I think this month to vote on, is for Rotary to continue sponsoring all the gaps in that program so we can have a solid program from grade 4 to grade 8 to have those conversations. And it's a little bit more extensive and in-depth than what the DARE is across the program.
Sergeant, can you speak to what the Drug Task Force is doing in the high schools? Because when I was in high school, it wasn't, okay, it was a long time ago, but we knew who the drug dealers were. Everybody knew. And it seemed like the teachers and the administration kind of turned a blind eye. What's being done today in the Lakeville schools as it relates to the Drug Task Force, and is the Drug Task Force engaged in busting dealers in the high schools?
Yes, that's a good question. We are engaged in, going after, that's not the right word, but dealing with individuals that are dealing either to the high schools or their high school students, and they're dealing. We do partnership with the school resource officers. We have great dialogue with them. I would say, in my perspective, that this school, at least in Lakeville, they're not turning a blind eye. If there is an issue, they contact the school resource officer, which in turn would contact us. I unfortunately have done several search warrants on teenagers that are dealing a lot of, whether it's marijuana wax or it's pills. Pills are easy because they can throw them in their pocket. They're easy to conceal. They're easy to pass out as far as, to other teenagers. There's not a big bag that they're carrying around. And taking 3-4 pills from a pill bottle at home most likely is going to go undetected unless you're using that medication on a regular basis. And that's where I see the issues in the school is the availability of the pills. And the other thing too, as far as like holding people accountable, if a 17-year-old sells to his buddy and we don't know for sure who sold to that buddy, and that buddy's not going to tell us, it makes it difficult on our end to prove, one way or another, whether or not that person sold. So it does take some cooperation. It does take people coming forward and saying, yes, I purchased this from so-and-so. The nice thing about the schools is that they do have an anonymous tip line, which I think is used quite frequently. So if there is a drug dealer that is either in the school or is targeting the schools, that does eventually get back to the drug task force.
I actually have 2 questions. First one, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. The mom of the 525?
Oh,
the
okay.
boy that handed out the pills, did he get arrested or?
There was a total of 5 overdoses that night, and the 3, including the gentleman, the kid who brought the pills, and 3 of them received medical attention, and my 2 did not because we didn't know they took them. He was arrested, and people said that they bought, he didn't sell them, but the judge still charged him with dealing because she said you're exchanging goods. And he got in trouble for that, and he had like 4 or 5 felony charges against him, but nothing in conjunction with Nick and Jack because they weren't here to say who gave it to them, and nobody was going to say that they saw him because nobody wants to be a snitch, and he wasn't going to admit it. But he did serve some jail time related to his felony charges, and then he was released.
My other question then is, I've heard a lot about, availability being the issue. So kind of like the 525 Foundation, what is Lakeville doing? Like, what is our relationship with clinics and pharmacies and grocery stores and whatever?
Well, we do have the prescription pill drop-off, both at the police department, and there's Walgreens that participate in that as well. That's part of it. The other part, as a task force member, when we, execute a search warrant, or even if we do like knock and talks and we see, pills kind of laying out, we educate the individuals on the dangers of that, especially if they have young kids or teenagers. I think it really comes down to education and just keeping the dialogue going and being there in a position where we can take custody of the pills that aren't being used and dispose of them properly.
I know I've worked with Walgreens with their pill drops that they have, and they have them in over 100 or 1,000 stores, I think, nationwide. And to count, they picked up 270 tons of prescription pills just since the inception of that program, which was started in 2016, which is equivalent to 150 cars. So that's a lot of prescription pills. That efforts like that and just having those permanent drop boxes out there locally, that's just, one Walgreens, doing something big for communities. So that's a lot of pills.
And I do know that locally, there's a lot of healthcare organizations, either doctor organizations, hospitals, and so forth, that are working to develop I don't want to call them standards, but just new ways of dealing with it, as Becky mentioned earlier, as trying to figure out how to minimize and find other sources for pain management and so forth. So locally, the healthcare organizations here are trying to figure out what some of those answers are. I don't know if we have anybody from any healthcare organization locally here that can speak exactly to that, but I do know that those conversations and efforts are going on here.
I run a family support network. I partner with Steve Rummer Hope Network, and so if you're interested, they have 3 initiatives, which is provider education or prescriber education, and naloxone distribution, as well as working with the community to educate. So if you are interested, you can go on steverumlerhopenetwork.org. They do public naloxone trainings, and they have over 150 educational videos. So if you're in the healthcare industry, you can go on there. You can view them for CEUs, and they have their 3rd initiative is advocacy and legislative work. And so they have a lot of information about the legislative initiatives that they're taking through the state and nationally. I just came back from the National Fed Up rally, which was this weekend. So that would be a resource if you are looking for more information on that.
I have a question for the board, and this is for each of the board members. If I'm a parent and I have preteens or teens, what conversation would each of you have with them about this, and how would you approach it? I'll start with Becky.
Well, I would go home and talk about the event that you were at tonight, the stories that you've heard, and just start a conversation. I think the worst conversations and the most deadly ones are the ones we don't have. So I think just starting some kind of a conversation and talking to them and letting them know about the dangers of misuse and abuse of prescription drugs. And if it's not prescribed to you, don't take it.
Well, as a parent myself, I have an 8-year-old son who I've had these conversations with, and I'm sure people might say, that's pretty young to have it, but it could be, he could be at a friend's house and the friend picks up a pill that looks like a sweet tart and says, you want it? I want him to know that, first of all, he has the right to say no. He has, as she had talked about, an exit strategy. If something doesn't seem right and he wants to come home, he can do that. We live in a neighborhood, so he can walk to and from his friends. And we've had the conversations about drugs and don't take things that aren't prescribed to you. Don't take any kind of medication that your parents aren't giving you. And we hope that at least that starts the dialogue. I mean, he's 8 and he kind of looks at me like, well, why would I do that? Well, as you get older, peer pressure kicks in and you do things. So we're hoping that on that foundation of him being 8 years old, that he will kind of keep that with him throughout growing up. And we'll have the conversation probably every couple months, just so he understands the severity of it. He also knows that I was a narcotics officer, and so he knows, what I did and the people that I arrested. So
I would start the conversation with my child, with Jake, while I didn't have the chance to. But I have lots of nieces and nephews, and, I tell them, not to take any prescription that's not given to them by a doctor or by their parent. And they don't have to give in to peer pressure. They can say no. And if they know of anybody struggling or whatever, tell somebody so that the conversation can go open, they can get treatment or whatever. Be open about it and just make sure that you have the conversations with them, which I never did with Jake about heroin. I had it with other drugs, but I didn't know heroin was even out there 5 years ago. So, but yeah, just keep the open dialogue with parents and kids.
I concur with the other panelists here. But asking them questions about what do you know, first of all, and, finding out, have you heard about this? Do you know any kids that, are doing this? What do you think about that? And then going from there to giving them accurate information. And, like you were just saying too, is, coming up with exit strategies for them. I know with my children, again, our kids are about the same age, so that wasn't a particular drug that we were too concerned about at that time. But it was also really opening up your house to having kids. And we just invited our daughter and son, invite all their friends over so that I was in control of the environment. And if I knew a party was going on, and I would just say, nope, you can't go. And we had some screams and fights and door slamming. And after on Monday morning, when they heard what went on at that party, they came up and said, thank you, Mom. I had no idea. Because they wouldn't have really known what to do. I mean, they were, so I think sometimes you just have to play the parent role too and just say, how about, or too, if there was a party going on, and we would say, hey, we're going to go up to Duluth for the weekend. Why don't you grab a couple girlfriends? Let's go. Go hit a park, a lot of parks. So we would try to give them a lot of alternative options so they weren't put into that situation. That was one of our strategies.
So I'm going to add my 2 cents on that too. As a mother of 4, I think it's also important. Never in your wildest dreams do you think that your child is going to fall into this. But, and even if that is the case, and they do make good decisions, don't fall into it, it's still really important to have those conversations with the child and your children, because they may be there to help a friend or be able to help a friend get out of it who hasn't had the fortunate conversation with their parents about this. So I know there's a lot of good things going on to help create awareness here. Chief Long and I did a heroin awareness forum a year and a half ago for the same piece, because people just weren't aware of what was happening in our community around heroin and how easy it was. And again, we had a panel like this. We have fabulous community partners, Rotary, the Chamber, Path Coalition, the Lakeville Public Safety Foundation, many groups that are coming together to help create awareness and put in funds, like the Youth Frontier that Rotary is looking at doing, to really help educate parents and children. And but when it all comes down to it, the schools can only do so much in a day with your child. It's up to the parents to really have those conversations. They're not easy conversations, but they're probably the most important ones that you have to have. And so from a parent looking at it from a school district perspective and a community perspective, and what our police officers are doing, everybody is trying to do what they can, but you have to, as a parent, have those conversations and not be afraid to have those.
Sure.
Are there any resources in the Lakeville area for families where there's been an event and maybe their son or their daughter, they're not into addiction, so they're not there, but they're past the prevention. And I know there was like a teen intervene, which was 4 counseling sessions that includes the kid and the family, that's evidence-based, to try to help a family work through what's going on and look at, are there any of those services available in Lakeville?
Do you want to handle that, Chief?
Well, I think some of those resources are here tonight. Judy, or do any of you want to speak to that? We do have resources, and they'll be around. The police department per se doesn't do anything specifically, but the community does, and you'll find people around the tables.
And I think that, and it's a good point too, because addiction and abuse doesn't affect one person; it's the whole family. And when the family members, if they become aware of it, and so often people will say afterwards, "Oh, I should have noticed that," or "I noticed something," or there was stress going on. They know those factors, and I know there's a number of organizations we have right out in the area here that work and support the public safety with that, and support families right here in Lakeville, and that you can connect up with. And so they're out back, and we'll have them available as well. So but that's a great point on that. Another point, and I know we do not have the Dakota County Attorney's Office here this evening, but
yeah, they're back there.
Oh, are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to talk just momentarily. They are here. But I just wanted to mention that people do get charged with homicide crimes when they deal drugs, and it results in a death, if it can be proved. And there's a very high standard of proof. But I know that there's been cases in Dakota County where that has happened. It's a third-degree murder charge in Minnesota. And I know that Anoka County and Hennepin County has also aggressively charged people with this, and when there's a death that comes out of that. So I know that that question was kind of floating around out there, and I just wanted to address that as well. Are there any other questions at this time? Yeah.
I just like to respond on the resources too. The county has really recognized that it is a family issue and that you can't just work with the kid. And so we've seen a sea change in our probation, juvenile probation system, where they used to just talk to the kids and then expect that they'd be showing up for school and not really dig into the other issues. So now they're getting much more family focused, finding out some of these kids are babysitting because mom's working 3 jobs, and recognizing that if we don't have a firm foundation and support, that sometimes bad choices are the only choices. And so I think, it's a process, and we're struggling with trying to be as effective as possible, but some of these situations that kids are facing are, really tough. And so no easy solutions sometimes, but if they're interacting as juvenile offenders, we're trying to turn them around before they end up with adult records and everything else that comes with that.
Yes, and in Dakota County, we have a drug court, which handles drug offenses in an entirely different way, with that in mind, about trying to turn people out of the criminal justice system. Yes, go ahead.
I just want to touch on something real quick. As a mother of an addict, we need to be our children's advocate. Like, wisdom teeth, you don't need pain pills. You're going to find broken bones. You just need to be your child's advocate, because it can start with one pill.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything. I've never used a microphone before, and I was considering standing up, but I kind of feel like if it might bite me sitting down, I hesitate to stand up. It could really take me for a loop. So I would just like to say thank you so much to the speakers for, I feel your loss. I have a good friend that had a son who died of overdose of heroin a few years ago. And, in my family, addiction permeates throughout, and it's so true. What you live with, you learn. What you learn, you practice. What you practice, you become. And so be it for many, many memories of, or many, many members of my family system. And you are doing what more people need to do, and that is, the action. It's always the action that counts. And instead of just talking about it, you're doing something, and that will, in precipitation, roll over to many, many other people. So, I'm glad to hear that our community is also so aggressive in fighting this insidious disease that captures and leads in death to so many of our loved ones. Thank you.
I'd just like to add a comment about being an advocate for your child. A year ago, my son, I took him in. He had an in and out surgery, day surgery, and the doctor wrote a prescription for some painkillers and said, here, in case you need it. And I just took it right back and handed it to the doctor. I said, we'll call you if we need it. Stop writing those. And those are the things that we need to start pushing back on. I mean, I respect the doctor's opinions and what they do for our health care, but when it comes time to prescription drugs and stuff, that's something that we should be requesting or having a conversation with the doctor about, not just having prescription drugs just handed to us. So being an advocate is probably the biggest thing you can do as a parent, and it starts with these conversations.
There's another question over there.
So I'm a critical care nurse, and I am working with elderly people, plus I had a 20-year-old today. And I don't know all the stories behind that, but I'm going to tell you, we have to advocate for our elderly people, because we had a situation where he was supposed to be getting the meds. We thought and we had to decrease the medication because he was so lethargic. He never went through DTs, anything like that. It was the family that were taking the medications. So not only the young children who are having wisdom teeth, but our elderly, we have to watch for them also.
I'm going to add just something a little bit different. Besides those of you who are sitting up there, and we do have an officer up there, but I've been privileged to do several ride-alongs and with the officers, and have come across some very disturbing and quite a few mental health illness, most of them due to use of narcotics or some type of form of chemical. And I have to say, as a community, not only do we have to advocate for our children, we also have to come together for those that are in the professions, law enforcement, teachers, and some of these other professions that never really went into it knowing that they were going to deal with this extensiveness over and above what their profession is. So I think be mindful of that too, and together, if they can help, families, also if families can help them back, because they have to go home, as you mentioned, what you've seen, and they have to cope with that. And that in itself is something that can put a community in danger if you have over and over situations that some of these people who aren't prepared, probably no one's ever prepared to deal with it, but I do give a hats off to all of those that work in those situations.
I think everyone's had an opportunity, would like to speak tonight, but we are coming to an end here, and I would just like to thank everyone and let everyone know that the solutions here involve everyone coming together and supporting each other. And you can tell by the number of organizations, the local civic organizations that are involved in this and putting effort into this and making this happen tonight and bringing these things happen and getting this conversation out here, which will produce other things. And so I challenge everybody in the room here and people watching to go out and do something with this, to go out and be involved with this, to go and talk to your child, to listen to the things that were said and forward that message. And that's how we're going to make progress in this. That's how we will move forward. I'd like to thank all of my panel members here. Could we give them a good round of applause here? I truly believe that your words will save lives. I truly believe that. And you don't know who you touch when you go out and tell someone. And everyone in here, think about that when you go forward, as you go forward and go out in the coming weeks and stuff. Your words that you bring forward and what you share will save lives. And that's how we're going to get through this. Thank you very much on behalf of the Lakeville Police Department, Independent School District 194, the Lakeville Rotary, Lakeville Chamber of Commerce, Lakeville Path Coalition, the Lakeville Public Safety Foundation. I'd like to thank you. And I got them all. Thank you very much and have a good evening.